Thank you very much, Madhu, for your very, very generous remarks. I don't know how far I deserve those things. Mr. President, Mr. Secretary, and my colleagues in the Rotary Club of Madras South, thank you very much for inviting me today, and it's a pleasure to come here again to address you on the same subject which I spoke about a year back. China continues to be important for us, and the topic selected today is very, very relevant, and we should all be very, very keen to understand how China is rising, what is the present stage, and what will be the implications of China's rise to the rest of the world, particularly in South Asia. It's a very, very important subject. Will the 21st century belong to the Chinese? Will be a Chinese century? It's a good question, which has been asked in the concept paper for this presentation today. Ladies and gentlemen, already in the communication to you, the achievements of China have been listed. I don't have to repeat it. It is the #2 economy in the world. I have to flag certain things. It is already #2 economy in the world. And US dollar 1 trillion in the treasury bonds in America. Very interestingly, since the year 1978 when the reforms were introduced in China, it has registered almost double-digit growth continuously. How they could do it, and what factors contributed to this kind of a miracle which has happened, particularly for our developing nations. It's very, very interesting. China, since 1978, has a kind of a strategy with kind of a far-reaching vision. All of you must have heard the leader's name, Deng Xiaoping, who is no more, the veteran leader. He started these reforms and opening up policy. The characteristics of that policy is threefold. Number one, open the reforms and opening up and open the country to the outside world. And secondly, establish, involve yourself with the global trade, very active involvement with the global trade. And third is connectivity with the rest of the world. Very far-sighted kind of an approach, which he initiated and which was inherited by his successors, and it is still continuing. Okay. Now, what is the secret behind this miracle? Why others cannot achieve this? The West is on the decline. All of you know about debt crisis in Europe and the downward trend in US economy. In spite of all these things, in spite of the global financial crisis, China has been able to withstand all the pressures, and it has been able to register a very steady growth. So what is the secret? That is a question all of you have to ask. The secret, of course, is a strategic vision which has been sort of given to China by the veteran leader Deng Xiaoping. As I told you, three characteristics. And the most important two aspects which propelled China into what it is today, that is investment and exports. There are two factors. The growth is driven by these two factors even today, investment and exports. Of course, there are changes in this kind of in the element. And one more important thing is the financial system, particularly the banking system in China. They're all lending to the Chinese manufacturers and Chinese companies, etc. And the government is guiding them. It is unlike in other countries. So the banks there in China, they serve the people, particularly the state-owned undertakings and other things. This is one of the important elements, because bank loans are somewhat easy in China because of the government guidance. After China joined the World Trade Organization, the foreign direct investment, it rushed into China. 500 Fortune listed companies listed in the Fortune magazines, they all have their representatives there and invested there. The result is China has become a manufacturing giant, and once it becomes a manufacturing giant, the exports automatically it got a boost. This is what has happened. Or why it has happened is all because of the new policies, the opening up policies, which began in China in 1978. Other field of achievement relates to poverty reduction in China. More than 400 million people that have been lifted out of the poverty level by the government. It's not a mean achievement for a country with more than 1 billion population. It's something great. As Mr. Rajan pointed out in his letter, China is engaging in a resource hunt throughout the world because China wants resources for its development and it doesn't have much of resources, particularly oil. So it looks in a big way in other continents. Its presence in Africa has grown tremendously. Middle East, Latin America, in Far East and Middle East, everywhere you go, you find the Chinese hunt for the resources. And it creates complications in world geopolitics. It comes into conflict with the interest of other nations also. India is also caught in this kind of a circle. China is a sports giant, as he has said, Olympics. Now, I have to mention about military modernization, especially. China is not aspiring only to be an economic superpower, it also wants to become a military superpower. But it's very, very interesting. You see, China's vision, particularly during the 18th Party Congress, which was over in November, it was announced that China will have 2 strategic goals. Imagine they identify their goals. I don't know whether in our country we have such a vision. When they have the vision, they articulate it also. They tell the world, the rest of the world, we have such vision. What is that vision? By 2020, it wants to create such a well-developed society. In their own jargon, it is it's called well-off society, where almost all the provinces, the average income will reach the level of that of advanced countries. 2020. 2020, there's a quadruplication of the per capita income and GDP, per capita GDP, as well as the GDP of both urban and rural residents. This is not empty slogans. They work towards it. And they got the capacity to implement that strategy because the institutional structure is providing such facility. The second goal relates to 2050, the middle of the century, where China will reach the level of the most advanced nations in the world. China will catch up with the United States. And then military modernization would have been completed by the time. So by 2050, you can imagine it's a very strong China, a giant China in the world, becoming #1 in everything. Not only in manufacturing, but also from the geopolitical point of view. Well, China is not at the same time free from the challenges. I have to mention about the challenges. You should ask, a good question has been asked, whether China will be able to attain the sustainability of the economic growth. It's a $1 million question. China faces great challenges in its economic growth. It has reached a stage where it has realized that simply by depending on exports, the growth is not possible. Even if the growth is there, it will not be a common prosperity. It will not be common prosperity of the people. What the Chinese leaders now want is a balanced development approach. They want balanced development covering the entire country. Even Deng Xiaoping said, well, if a few areas can get rich, it is all right. The rest of them can catch up later. The new leadership is not accepting that. The new leadership wants the prosperity should reach every corner of the country. There's a slight kind of a shift in that. Now, that is why, what are all the challenges being faced by China? There's time for me?
Yeah.
Okay, tell me. The great challenge is, there is a big gap between the advanced coastal regions like Shanghai and the interior provinces like Tibet and Gansu, Xinjiang, etc. There is also a big gap between the rich and poor. A worker in a rural area, his income is very, very low. It's not comparable to what a worker in Shanghai is getting. Then there is a tremendous environmental challenge in China. A lot of things are happening there. Environmental hazards, and there are a lot of instances. So government is very, very aware of this problem, and they have included ecological question in their party program, which was finalized in November last year. There is a kind of a demographic change also. This is also a serious problem because the working age population strength is declining in China. In India, it is otherwise. We have, I think, a very significant percentage of our population, they are all very young. In China, more than 60%, or they are all old people. So the working age population, that ratio, so the demographic dividend is no longer there. So they have to tackle all these things. The other challenge is the financial sector reforms. This is a very difficult thing, and what they are going to do now is how to improve the quality of the investment. It is not the amount which is going to be invested within the country. So now the slogan is, the entire focus is on boosting the domestic demand. Exports are no longer a priority area for China because it is declining. All of you know why it is declining? The West European market has weakened. The United States economic decline, global economic financial crisis, all these things have woken up China to look towards boosting the domestic demand. So for the boosting the domestic demand, financial sector reforms are very necessary because they have to invest the available finance in a proper way. So the focus is on now quality of the growth. It is not the quantity of the growth, GDP growth. It's not the 10% or 11%, the quality of the growth. So when the approach is like that, China may not mind the growth coming down. For example, only 7 to 8% growth this year for the 2012 is being anticipated. But they are not bothered because when the restructuring takes place, it is very, very natural. So the latest strategy which has been finalized in the Central Economic Work Conference for the 2013 in January, they focused on economic restructuring, expanding the domestic demand, and the concentration on improving the rural income, social development. You see, economic development and social developments are different. Social development means removing the imbalance. For example, a lot of workers are getting retrenched and they are moving from rural areas to urban areas. When the state-owned undertakings are getting reformed, some of them are retrenched and they demonstrate. And there are a lot of unrest. The more than mass demonstrations, they are bit, the authorities themselves are bit. So the social unrest they have to tackle because the gap between the rich and poor are growing. It's also anti-corruption. The corruption phenomenon is very, very serious in China because everywhere in the party, if some keen students, some of you might be knowing about the fate of a leader who is called Po Shi Lai, who is kind of being investigated, rather he was being punished on corruption and discipline charges. And it all depends on, it all shows that the government is very, very serious about the on-corruption issue. Wen Jiabao and the party leaders have said, if the corruption issue is not tackled, it will lead to the collapse of the party and it will lead to the collapse of the state. And Xi Jinping, who is the new leader of China and who is going to be elected as a president of the nation on March 3 or March 4, their session is going to begin. So he says that this issue will be on the top of the agenda. These are all, when they say this, we have to take it very seriously because in China, once they draw a roadmap, the system is so evolved that it will be pursued with a kind of a vigor and strength. But it will not only on the paper, it will be pursued there, and they have the capacity to do that. There is a slight economic decline, as I have already told, but they don't mind because they're looking towards kind of a balanced development. So the key word in China now, as far as the economic growth is concerned, how to promote the private consumption and how to do investment within the country so that the domestic demand can be boosted. They no longer depend on exports. With the result, the structural changes are taking place in China, which is going to influence the world economy. And the foreign trade data statistics, it shows China's foreign trade is declining. Now, definitely, when foreign trade is declining, exports are bound to suffer because exports was the growth engine, one of the growth engines, and the indication is that it's going to is already coming down. Some of the data, so they have to sort of they seem to be prepared, and the most important thing is the labor cost is also going up in China. This is one interesting thing which we have to take note of, because the entire rest of the world looked upon China as a cheap labor. For the potential, cheap labor potential. But no, it's no longer so. The labor cost is increasing there. So with the result, there are manufacturing nations, other nations like Southeast Asia, East Asia, other nations, they're all looking towards other countries which have a cheap labor. I think we fit in that, Indians. Okay, these are all about economy and something like that. I have to talk about strategic aspects, which is very the external foreign relations. To suit its reform process, to suit its main goal of reform and modernization, the 2020 goal and 2050 goal, they have prescribed, they have formulated a foreign policy which they call it as based on a harmonious world. The world has to be a harmonious world. So they aim at creating a win-win relationship in international relations. So their entire diplomacy is focused on winning international relations on the basis of a win-win kind of a situation. Both the sides are winning. Very, very noble and entire harmonious world and everybody living in there. And China wants to play a very, very positive role in world organizations and United Nations, world financial system, and on all other, tackling other world issues like climate change, environment, everything, you name it, China wants to take part. And China has grown in such a way, its status has risen in such a way, without China, nothing is taking place in the world. Every other nation in the world look towards China before they decide their policy. It has become very, very important. We have to take note of that. But at the same time, China is telling that on matters of core interest, we will not sacrifice. What are the areas of core interest? Mostly territorial issues. Issues concerning the territorial integrity and sovereignty of the nation, we will not compromise. And they are even telling that when we say we will not compromise, we mean it. That means they may not hesitate to use force in settling the issues. What is happening in the East China Sea with Japan? China-Japan relations today is at its what should I say? A level which causes worries elsewhere. Every day there are symptoms of tension in that sea, Senkaku issue. On South China Sea, the sea territory issue, China is showing its military teeth. And it believes that the United States is rebalancing its role in East Asia, and it is not in the strategic interests of China. So they are worried. So, ladies and gentlemen, what I wanted to focus is there is an element of contradiction in the foreign policy parameters of China. One is the search for win-win relationship, and another is no hesitation to use, take strong measures to protect its territorial sovereignty, to protect its core interests. And with India, what is happening? In spite of the 15 rounds of talks between the two special representatives, our border issue has not been settled, and it's not going to be settled very soon, because their stand, they are very, very consistent in claiming the Arunachal Pradesh of India. Will they compromise on that? It's a big question. Of course, there is no tension in the Sino-Indian border now. Confidence building measures are working very well. I will not say that, but the tensions are elsewhere, in East Asia particularly. But who can guarantee tensions will not appear in the Sino-Indian relations again? Will 1962 be repeated? There is no proper answer to that, considering the motivations behind China's territorial claims. One more issue which I want to highlight is that China's military modernization. China is improving its navy. It wants a blue water navy, and it aims to have naval presence, or rather at least some kind of a presence everywhere in the world. The Chinese naval vessels are going to Gulf of our Persian Gulf, particularly Gulf of Aden, very, very often to protect its economic interests. It's also desirous of establishing some kind of a basis, if not naval basis, in the key areas through which the transport of oil takes place to China. For example, with Seychelles, it has come to an agreement providing for some kind of help of the authorities to replenish the Chinese naval vessels. What is happening in Hambantota in Sri Lanka? Of course, it's a port project. There is no military angle to that. But we have to be very careful in analyzing what will happen in future. If Sri Lankan government provides some kind of replenishment facility to Chinese naval vessels, it will have its own kind of importance for our security plans, strategic plans. In India's neighborhood, it's increasing its presence, strategic presence with Bangladesh, Chittagong port, Sitwe, etc. And Gwadar port, which has been handed over to a Chinese company now, is another example of, some people interpret it as an encirclement of India by China. I am not going to say like that. But one thing is very, very sure, that in realizing its strategic interests, China is going in a big way. Strategic interests involve the energy interest nowadays. Energy security has become very important in Chinese foreign policy. And to protect its energy interest, China is perhaps feeling the necessity to go all the way to almost all the continents, and to protect it by force or protect it by military strength if necessary. And in that way, we have to see what is happening around India, and China's security thinking is revolving around the situation which is developing in East Asia, the US presence, the US what is called the rebalancing of Obama regime there. US is going to increase its naval presence there in a very, very significant manner. The tensions in Japan, the tensions in the Philippines, etc. They are very much worried about that. The next issue is Taiwan, one of the dynamic regions in the world, which has got its own economic importance. For our request policy, this is very important. It is the tensions are still there because the reunification has not taken place. Now, come down to this region. Countries like India and subcontinent and the Sino-Pakistan nexus, etc. So many things, and even I think our defense minister has said that the Chinese company's presence in Gwadar is kind of a concern for us and all. There is an internal pressure also coming to the new Chinese leadership, Xinjiang and Tibet. In Xinjiang, the Uyghur Muslim population is very restricted, and China believes that it is getting some kind of support from outside for kind of terrorist activities there. So that's another area of concern, and what is happening in Tibet is also a very serious issue for Japan and China. These two issues have not been addressed by the Chinese new leadership yet, because I have not seen any evidences of that. A lot of its self-immolations are taking place in Tibet, and the Dalai Lama is being accused of encouraging these kind of self-immolations. So some kind of an unstable situation is prevailing there, and for that matter even in Xinjiang. So these are the things, security challenges, which China's new leadership have to take care, which have to tackle very seriously. The situation, I will say that in the economic sense, the challenge before China, in order to sustain the economic growth, it is very serious now because of the continuation of various challenges. I have already told you. The decline in the West Europe and the United States has got a particular kind of a concern to the Chinese, who are now looking towards the ways to improve the domestic economy, etc. In the strategic sense, nothing has been solved. Why? The reason is, I believe, it is China's own creation. China is combining its core interest approach with their friendly international affairs approach, and because of this assertiveness which is coming from this core interest approach, other countries are getting worried, particularly countries in South Asia, Asian nations, etc. So the foreign policy is also kind of challenges or have not disappeared completely. There got the Xi Jinping and his new leadership, 7-member Politburo Standing Committee. Xi Jinping is going to be the next president. the next premier will be Li Keqiang. Both have got very, very serious challenges in their hands. How they can do it? Possibly economically, they might do better, because I personally believe that 12-year plan and the strategy which they have chalked out now, and the investment which is going to be made within the country, huge investment, and the financial sector reforms, etc. They are going to, I think they are going to benefit the Chinese regime. But I keep my fingers crossed as far as the foreign relationship is concerned, because it's full of troubles. If there is a slight kind of a mistake takes place, there will be tension, particularly between China and Japan relations, the South China Sea situation, etc. It's a very tough job before the new leadership. So as far as China's future is concerned, which is one of the points mentioned to me in the notes, I keep my fingers crossed. I don't know. I'm not very optimistic that it will take a lot of time. It will take a lot of time for the Chinese regime to attend to these problems to the fullest satisfaction. Very importantly, the Chinese reforms and opening up policy, or the new leadership has said it will continue. It will continue without fail. But at the same time, they say it is a long-term process. There will be a phased kind of a progress in that. Don't expect anything miracle in the immediate future. This is what it says. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is what I wanted to say. And optimism, yes, possibly internally, particularly in the economic sense. China's growth story will continue if they tackle, if they are successful, if China is successful in boosting the domestic demand. In strategic terms, how China is going to solve its various critical issues disturbing the peace in the region. That's what it is. 2020 goal, the multiplication of the per capita urban and rural area GDP, and the 2050 goal of fullest modernization. They call it the socialist modernization, etc. I don't know. They're all looking like a dream. Absolutely looking like a dream. So a mixed picture. I'm giving you a mixed picture as far as China's future is concerned. And they've got a great task in their hands. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much, sir, for that well-rounded presentation.